Hi, I'm Angela Sensiplano Holmes, and I am an educator, a teacher, and I am a self-published author of Life is a Classroom, A Teacher's Journey. I am here today to talk about sharing the ugly, because that's kind of like what I did in this book. You see, a couple years ago into my teaching career, my grade level partner and I thought it would be such a great idea to collect all of our funny stories about our students and compile them into a chicken soup for the soul-like book. And that idea stuck with me throughout the years, until a few years ago when I decided to add it to my list of things I must do in my lifetime. And at that time, I actively committed to collecting the stories from my colleagues, usually just having them tell me a story into my voice recorder on my cell phone. I'd collect them from teachers at my school site, or others in my district at trainings, or when I'd go to other school districts to teach educators. I'd ask them to share. I got a lot of funny ones, but then people were starting to talk about the sad, uncomfortable ones too. And I realized I too had a bunch of sad stories from my own students as well. And so I began to put them down on paper, computer actually, and every time that we were on break or school wasn't in session, I added to my list trying to put these stories into some sort of format that made sense. And I soon had this boring list of funny stories and sad stories, which I quickly reached the infamous writer's block. And then in the beginning of the summer of 2016, I found a free webinar online on how to write your book in 28 days or less, hosted by Mastin Kipp. He's an author, he's an entrepreneur, he's a spiritual leader, inspirational speaker, and he founded the dailylove.com. He inspired me. I finally wrote my book during that summer. But what a crazy ride that whole book writing took me on. My idea went from, hey, I'm gonna write this book about my students' funny stories, to, hey, how about I put all the ugly truth about my life's experiences and my students so that everyone can judge me and see all my insides. That typically isn't my personality, but seriously, as I sat down and write this book, it just spewed out of me. The challenges I was going through with my marriage, my mother's cancer journey, along with the terrible unjust dysfunction and adversity that was going on in my students' lives. And to top it off, I began to see this big, beautiful connection between the two, and how I've been living this parallel life alongside my students, and they've actually been my greatest teachers. And I saw the purpose in it all, and my growth in it all. I cried a lot, reliving all that stuff in my personal life. I thought I had put it all behind me, but it obviously needed further healing. And sometimes as I'd write and I'd write and I'd write, I'd go back to it and think, wow, that came out of my head. What an extremely therapeutic experience it all was for me. And it was super hard going back to those awful times in my life. I have a colleague, Ashley Trzynski. She's an awesome woman, an incredible, innovative educator, who at the beginning of writing all this had introduced me to an author, Glennon Doyle. And her style of writing, an unapologetic, blunt truth, really inspired me. She'd talk about how having the courage to share our ugly, difficult stories gives others the courage to heal their own. And that helped me. It helped give me the go-ahead to let it all out and put it out there to be exposed. And at this point, it was just one therapy session after another for me as I wrote. And it never went really any further than that in my head until my two boys caught on to what I was doing. Mom was writing a book, and they thought that was cool. And now that they were in on it, I had to see this whole thing to fruition. They had to see their mom finish this book and publish this book, because I wanted to set the example for them of finishing what you start. The downside of letting out all the junk and ugly? Oh, let me count the ways. Fear, offending people, fear of judgment, fear of exposure, fear of people lashing out at me, worry that I might offend my colleagues, my family, my students' family. Did I mention fear? It was all fine with me just reading the words I had put on the page. But when my editor, Bonnie Honeycutt, fell into my path, who is, by the way, another awesome woman, I had this terrible fear of people actually reading this stuff. This was following through with publishing my book. Other than following through for my boys, it was ultimately to help people and to shed light on adversity. It was to tell people who were going through the same or something similar that they weren't alone. It was to shed light on what adversity so many children were going through on a daily basis. I thought I had no one to connect with when I was going through it with myself. It could have been a lot easier for me if I knew that other people were indeed going through this stuff too. It became then about taking risks, having faith, which I learned from my mother, standing in the face of others who may possibly lash out at me, and ultimately being true to my calling and my higher good. I had to pay attention to our higher purpose and remember that spark comes from connection and communication with others. Everything's better when you share it. Deepak Chopra talked about this. He said that our destinies are richer when we're in connection with others. And it's through our willingness to connect, to share our stories and communicate with others, that we grow more comfortable being in and speaking our truth. And then we begin to let our guard down and we ask for what we want and need, recognizing that we're all connected in consciousness. I began to see that as we courageously share, we receive support. We inspire others, and we discover unexpected connections, and we live in community. So, I'm ready to see what happens since I've published this book. Will anyone even read it? If they do, will they be inspired, touched, encouraged? I'm not sure. Right now, I just feel like I'm standing on the edge of a high dive right now with my eyes closed tight, ready to jump off.